Hi, last week we added gross margin to our report using DAX. If you recall, I'm going to highlight gross margin. We said take the total sales and subtract the total cost. And if I go in to look at my data in the data mode and I scroll over to the right, I can see where I actually added that column. Now the thing about columns is it does this row by row by row by row. Because it gets calculated at the time the data is refreshed, there's no way for it to know like what the grand total is going to be or anything like that. It'll always calculate row by row. Measures, on the other hand, will actually just create the formula or the function, and it gets used or calculated whenever you use it in a visual. So let's add gross margin percent, where we're going to take the total gross margin amount divided by the total sales to see what our gross margin is. Let's first do it with a column so you could see why adding a column will not always be the answer. So what I'm going to do is come up and just add a new column, and I'm going to call this one gross margin percent, and I'm going to add in my formula, which will be gross margin divided by total sales. There we go. The IntelliSense helped me out there. I'm going to go ahead and click on that checkbox. Let's come back and look at our data again. If I come over to the right, I could see it. A lot of decimal places, so let's format that as a currency, or let's format that as a percent. You notice I have some infinity things going on here too. That looks a bit weird. So let's come back and let's add that gross margin percent. And now you'll notice that we've got all kinds of issues going on, and it's not even correct. Now in this particular example, this looks to be correct. For the most part, this is the detailed line information, or in theory it is. Over here, I'm summing or aggregating by customer number. And 44,000 or 45,000 divided by 91,000 is not 2,614%. So it's not aggregating right. All it's doing is taking all the gross margin percents for this customer and adding the percents together as if they were just a regular number. And that's going to create problems. So let's do it adding a column. Now I'm going to come in here and delete that column I just added and pop those back. All right, great. So now let's add a measure. So I'm going to just right mouse click here and add a measure. I like to right mouse click instead of just adding it from the model. And the reason why I do that is because I want to make sure that this function gets included in this particular query. All right, so let's come in and we'll type in again gross margin percent. And since this is a calculation and not, or a measure and not a column, I'm going to put a semicolon right before the equal marks. That's the way I can denote when I'm just looking at the formula that this indeed is a measure and not a column. I can't just go in and use the gross measure. That's not going to appear. I have to tell it how to aggregate. So what I want to do, and let's pretend we'll just look at the customer one. I want to sum up all the gross margins for this customer. So I'm going to use the aggregation called sum, and I'll look for gross margin. And then I want to divide that by the sum of all of the total sales for this customer. So once again, I'll use the aggregation called sum, and I'll look for total sales. And now I have my function, and I'm going to go ahead and commit it and just click on the checkbox. You'll notice the icon for it is very different. It is like a little calculator now. Again, because it's not going to yield any data until we use it in a visual. Now I have it highlighted. I'm going to go ahead and make it a percent, and now I'll drag it out onto my reports. And this time you'll notice this looks right. It's 48%, close to 50 as I was talking about. I have totals now, and I no longer have infinities. And if I were to go and look at the data and scroll over to the right again, I have no gross margin percent column because again it gets calculated at the time of use. Sometimes you need to do an aggregation in your function, and whenever you do, that's when you need to use a measure. Hope this helps.